My name is Belinda, and at 32, I stood at my brother's engagement party watching my entire family laugh at me. The smell of soil on my work boots, the dirt under my fingernails, everything about me screamed farmer to them. My brother's fiancée wrinkled her nose and whispered loudly about the family embarrassment. Then my father clinked his champagne glass, ready to announce Thomas as the new CEO. I set down my water glass and spoke the words that would shatter their world forever. Before we continue this incredible journey of betrayal and triumph, I want to know where you're watching from today. Are you someone who's ever been underestimated by your own family? Hit that like button if you believe success is the best revenge, and don't forget to subscribe because what happens next will show you exactly why the ones who mock us often end up begging for our help. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this farmer brought an entire empire to its knees. Growing up in the Hartwell family meant everything revolved around appearances and status. My father built his manufacturing empire from scratch, and he expected his children to be perfect representations of wealth and sophistication. My brother Thomas, 3 years older, was groomed from birth to be the heir apparent. He had the looks, the charm, and most importantly, the ruthless ambition my father admired. Victoria, my younger sister, carved out her place as the family princess, with her designer clothes and artistic pretensions that my parents found endearing. Then there was me. While Thomas attended elite business camps and Victoria went to fashion workshops in Paris, I spent my summers in my grandmother's garden, learning about soil composition and crop rotation. My hands were always dirty, my hair always had leaves in it, and I preferred overalls to Oscar de la Renta. At family dinners, while Thomas discussed merger strategies and Victoria showed sketches of her latest designs, I would excitedly talk about composting techniques or the perfect pH balance for tomatoes. The silence that followed was always deafening. The mockery started early. During my 13th birthday party at our country club, I had asked for gardening tools instead of jewelry. My mother's friends tittered behind their manicured hands while my father's jaw tightened with embarrassment. Thomas loudly joked that I must have been switched at birth with a farmer's baby. Even the staff smirked. That night, I heard my parents arguing about what to do with their odd daughter, who embarrassed them at every social function. High school was a battlefield of expectations. While my classmates from similar wealthy families discussed their futures at Ivy League schools and their parents' companies, I researched agricultural programs. My guidance counselor, clearly briefed by my parents, kept steering me toward business administration. When I finally announced at dinner that I'd been accepted to Cornell's College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, my mother actually dropped her wine glass. Thomas laughed until tears ran down his face, calling it the most expensive way to become a peasant. My father's response was worse than laughter. He gave me a cold, measuring look and said I was throwing away everything he had built. How could I explain that I wasn't throwing anything away, but building something different? My grandmother was the only one who understood. She'd grown up on a farm before marrying into wealth, and she saw something in me that the others missed. The night before I left for college, she pulled me aside and handed me a check. It wasn't much by Hartwell standards, but she winked and said to use it wisely because good soil always yields the best returns. College was liberation. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who understood that agriculture wasn't just about farming, but about innovation, sustainability, and feeding the world. I excelled in my classes, particularly in agricultural technology and sustainable farming practices. My professors encouraged my ideas about combining traditional farming wisdom with cutting-edge technology. Meanwhile, my family treated my education like an extended phase I'd grow out of, like when I'd insisted on being vegetarian at 14. The family gatherings became exercises in endurance. Every Christmas, every birthday, every charity gala was the same. Thomas would arrive in his latest luxury car, boasting about his position at father's company and the deals he was closing. Victoria would sweep in wearing her own designs, dropping names of celebrities who had supposedly worn her pieces. And I would arrive, usually straight from my internships at various farms, looking exactly like what I was, someone who worked with the earth. The nicknames were endless. Thomas's fraternity brothers called me Farmer Belle when I attended his graduation. Victoria's fashion friends referred to me as the Hartwell's dirty little secret. Even the household staff had been infected by the family's attitude, barely concealing their smirks when I showed up with soil samples I'd forgotten were in my pockets. My mother developed a habit of scheduling her migraines whenever I had any achievement to share, while my father perfected the art of changing the subject whenever anyone asked about his eldest daughter. But it was my grandfather who saw what they all missed. My father's father had built the foundation of the family fortune, and he recognized a builder when he saw one. During the summer before my senior year, he invited me to spend a week at his estate. While the rest of the family assumed he was trying to talk sense into me, he was actually teaching me about investments, market analysis, and the power of patience. He showed me how he'd started with nothing and built an empire by seeing opportunities where others saw impossibility. He told me something that changed my life forever. As we walked through his private garden, he stopped at a small apple tree and said that my family saw only the dirt, but he knew I could see the orchard that could grow from a single seed. He made me promise to never let their blindness limit my vision. A year later, he was gone, and I thought his wisdom had died with him. I had no idea he'd left me the tools to prove them all wrong. The reading of my grandfather's will was a study in family dynamics. Thomas received the vintage car collection and a trust fund. Victoria got the art collection and property in the Hamptons. My parents inherited the bulk of the estate and controlling interest in various investments. When the lawyer read my portion, the room went silent. I received a modest sum of money and a sealed envelope with instructions not to open it until I was truly ready to plant my own orchard. My siblings exchanged amused glances, and my mother muttered something about grandfather's declining mental state. 5 years passed before I understood what he meant. I had used my inheritance from grandmother and the money from grandfather to purchase 40 acres of supposedly worthless land outside the city. My family's reaction was predictable. Thomas joked about me finally accepting my destiny as a peasant. Victoria suggested I could at least grow flowers for her fashion shows. My father refused to even discuss it, while my mother worried about what her society friends would think when they found out her daughter was literally a farmer. What they didn't know was that I had spent 2 years researching that land. The soil composition was perfect for organic farming, the water table was excellent, and most importantly, it was positioned perfectly for the coming expansion of the city's organic food distribution network. I started small, focusing on heirloom vegetables and sustainable practices. My first harvest barely broke even, which gave my family endless ammunition for their jokes at holiday dinners. But I wasn't just farming. I was building a business model that combined traditional agriculture with technology. I developed partnerships with local restaurants desperate for reliable organic suppliers. I created a subscription service for families wanting fresh, local produce. Within 18 months, I had to hire help. Within 2 years, I was purchasing adjacent land. By the 3rd year, I had investors approaching me about scaling the operation. Meanwhile, the family business was rotting from within. Thomas, installed as executive vice president straight out of his MBA program, was making increasingly risky decisions. He had a gambling problem that started with friendly poker games and escalated to high-stakes private games with dangerous people. He used the company expense account to cover his losses, justifying it as entertainment expenses for clients who didn't exist. The board members who questioned him were gradually pushed out and replaced with his drinking buddies. Victoria's fashion line, funded entirely by the company as a vanity project, was hemorrhaging money. She spent millions on elaborate fashion shows that attracted Instagram influencers, but no actual buyers. Her designs were derivative and poorly constructed, but she surrounded herself with yes men who praised her genius. My parents, blinded by their favoritism, continued pumping money into her label, calling it an investment in the company's diversification. My father, growing older and more stubborn, refused to see the warning signs. When senior employees came to him with concerns about Thomas's management, he accused them of jealousy. When the CFO presented reports showing Victoria's line had lost 80% of its investment, He fired the CFO for negativity. He was captain of a sinking ship, but he'd painted over the holes rather than fix them. One night, I opened my grandfather's envelope. Inside was a letter and a portfolio of stocks I never knew existed. The letter was brief but devastating. He wrote that he'd watched his son spoil his grandchildren, turning them into parasites who would destroy everything built by generations. Except for me. He'd invested in various companies under my name since I was born, letting them grow quietly. Now they were mine to use wisely. The portfolio was worth more than my siblings' inheritance combined, but more importantly, it included shares in the family company purchased through shell corporations. I spent months understanding what I had. Then I made my move. Using the profits from my agricultural business, which had expanded to include 3 farms and a processing facility, I began quietly buying shares of the family company. Former board members, pushed out by Thomas, were eager to sell to someone they trusted. Employees with stock options, worried about their futures, sold to me at fair prices. I worked through multiple holding companies, keeping my identity hidden. The board members who remained began reaching out to me privately. They knew the company was failing, but felt powerless against my father's iron grip. They shared horrifying details. Thomas had borrowed against company assets for his gambling debts, Victoria's fashion shows were funded by employee pension funds, and my father had been cooking the books to hide the losses. The company that had been the family's pride was 3/4 hollow, surviving on reputation alone. The betrayal went deeper than mismanagement. I discovered Thomas had actively sabotaged a partnership I'd tried to create between my farms and the company's distribution network. He'd told the board that associating with my agricultural ventures would damage their premium brand. Victoria had spread rumors in the fashion industry that I was mentally unstable, living like a hermit on my farm. My parents had told their friends I was receiving therapy for my inability to accept my place in society. Every family gathering became an intelligence-gathering mission. They spoke freely around me, assuming I was too simple to understand their discussions. I learned about Thomas's plan to sell off company assets to cover his debts. I heard Victoria discussing using company funds to buy her way into Paris Fashion Week. I watched my parents plan their retirement celebration, oblivious to the fact that there would be nothing left to retire from. 6 months ago, I made my final move. A major institutional investor wanted out, and I bought their entire stake. Combined with my other holdings, I now controlled 51% of the company. The remaining board members, the ones with integrity, allied with me immediately. We began documenting everything, every misused fund, every falsified report, every violation of fiduciary duty. The evidence was overwhelming. I hired the best corporate lawyers in the city and prepared for war. But I didn't want to destroy the company. I wanted to save it. The employees didn't deserve to suffer for my family's greed and incompetence. The company my great-grandfather started and my grandfather built still had good bones under all the rot. It just needed someone who understood that real growth came from the ground up, not from the top down. The night before Thomas's engagement party, I held a secret board meeting. The vote was unanimous, the current leadership had failed, and dramatic action was needed. We agreed to wait until after the party for the announcement, giving my family one last night of illusion. I went home to my penthouse apartment, not the farm shack they imagined I lived in, and prepared for the next day. The girl they'd mocked for having dirt under her nails was about to show them what she'd grown in that soil. The Hartwell estate gleamed under the setting sun as I pulled up in my simple but reliable truck. The valet's expression shifted from professional courtesy to barely concealed disdain when he saw what I was driving. I handed him the keys with a smile, knowing that by tomorrow, he'd be telling everyone about the night everything changed. The grand ballroom was already filling with guests, each one representing a who's who of the city's elite families, all here to celebrate Thomas's engagement to Melissa Weatherton, heiress to a shipping fortune. I had deliberately arrived late, not out of disrespect, but because I'd been in a crucial meeting with international investors interested in my agricultural technology firm. The contrast between that boardroom, where I was treated as an innovator and leader, and this ballroom, where I would be treated as a joke, was stark. I smoothed down my simple navy dress, the only formal wear I owned that didn't require dry cleaning, and stepped inside. The reactions were immediate and predictable. Cousin Jennifer, dripping in diamonds, whispered loudly to her husband about my farmer's tan. Aunt Margaret, my father's sister, glided over with her practiced smile that never reached her eyes. She air-kissed me, careful not to actually make contact, and cooed about how brave I was to attend when I must feel so out of place. Uncle Robert joined her, making a show of sniffing the air and asking if I'd brought fertilizer as my +1. I made my way through the crowd, each group I passed falling silent before erupting in whispers. My dress, which had seemed perfectly appropriate when I left home, now felt like burlap compared to the designer gowns surrounding me. I caught glimpses of myself in the gilded mirrors and understood their mockery. Next to these polished society women, I looked exactly like what I was, someone who worked for a living, whose hands knew labor, whose success wasn't inherited but earned. Thomas held court near the champagne fountain, Melissa draped on his arm like an expensive accessory. She was everything my family wanted me to be, blonde, polished, decorative, and utterly dependent on family money. Her own family's fortune made her acceptable despite her room temperature IQ and her habit of speaking in baby talk. Thomas saw me approaching, and his eyes lit up with malicious glee. He had always enjoyed having an audience for his cruelty. He raised his voice so everyone nearby could hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "meet my sister, the farmer." The crowd tittered obediently. He wasn't finished. "Belinda here chose dirt over diamonds. Can you believe it? Maybe she can supply the vegetables for the wedding. What do you say, Bella? Can you manage to grow something that won't embarrass us?" The laughter was louder this time, emboldened by his cruelty. Melissa giggled and added her own barb. "We'll have to seat you carefully at the wedding, won't we? Perhaps at a table in the back, near the service entrance? You'd be more comfortable there, closer to your element." She wrinkled her nose delicately. "And maybe we can arrange for you to change before the photos? We want everything to be perfect for our special day." I smiled and congratulated them both, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. But inside, I was counting down the minutes. Around the room, I spotted 3 board members who knew what was coming. They gave me subtle nods of acknowledgement. I also noticed several employees from the company, looking uncomfortable at this display of wealth while knowing their jobs hung by a thread. My mother materialized at my elbow, her fingers digging into my arm as she steered me toward a quiet corner. Her voice was low and furious. "Couldn't you have made an effort just this once?" she hissed. "Do you know who's here? The Weathertons, the Blackwoods, the Ashfords, all watching you stand there like some field hand at a garden party. You're embarrassing us, as usual." I looked at my mother, really looked at her. The perfectionist who had spent my childhood trying to mold me into something I wasn't. The woman who had never once visited my farms, never tasted the food I grew, never acknowledged my success. She was wearing a dress that cost more than most people's cars, jewelry that could fund a small school, and she looked absolutely miserable. The constant pressure of maintaining appearances had carved deep lines around her mouth and eyes. She continued her tirade, listing all the ways I'd failed her expectations. My hair wasn't styled, my nails weren't manicured, I wasn't wearing the appropriate jewelry. She had the audacity to suggest that if I couldn't afford proper attire, I should have asked for help. The irony of her offering financial assistance while I owned more assets than everyone in this room combined was almost too much to bear. My father's voice boomed across the ballroom, calling for attention. He stood at the microphone, every inch the successful patriarch, completely unaware that his empire was built on sand. He began with the usual platitudes about family and legacy, about building something to pass down through generations. He praised Thomas's business acumen, which was laughable considering I'd seen the real numbers. He spoke about Victoria's artistic vision, while her fashion line bled money like a severed artery. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. My father announced his intention to retire within the year, officially naming Thomas as his successor. The room erupted in applause. Thomas preened like a peacock, accepting congratulations from people who would be calling their lawyers tomorrow. Melissa was already planning her renovation of the executive offices, loudly discussing with her friends how she'd redecorate to reflect their new status. I felt my phone vibrate. The final purchase had gone through. I now owned 68% of Hartwell Industries. The other board members owned another 15%, all aligned with me. My family retained only 17%, not enough to block any decision we made. The company they were celebrating, the legacy they were toasting, was no longer theirs. They just didn't know it yet. Victoria swept over, champagne glass in hand, designer dress catching the light. She performed her usual inspection of my appearance, her nose wrinkling with each perceived flaw. Behind her trailed her entourage of fashion friends, all ready to witness her cutting wit. She didn't disappoint. "Belinda, darling," she drawled, "I've been thinking. For my spring collection launch, I'll need fresh flowers. Perhaps you could help? I know you're good with dirt." The group laughed as if she'd said something incredibly clever. She continued, emboldened by the audience. "I'm planning to expand internationally, you know. The company will be funding my atelier in Milan." Her eyes glittered with malice. "Maybe I'll send you a postcard from Fashion Week. Do they deliver mail to farms? Or should I address it to the barn?" More laughter. One of her friends added that at least I was dressed appropriately for mucking stalls. The conversation around us continued, a symphony of condescension. Cousin Jennifer loudly discussed her children's acceptance to elite prep schools, pointedly asking if I'd ever considered getting a real job to afford such advantages for my future children. Aunt Margaret shared gossip about some acquaintance's daughter who had also gone through a rebellious phase before coming to her senses and marrying well. Uncle Robert made jokes about farm animals that would have been juvenile coming from a child, let alone a 60-year-old man. Through it all, I smiled and nodded, playing the role they'd cast me in. The simple sister, the embarrassment, the one who didn't understand how the real world worked. I accepted their mockery like rainfall on good soil, knowing it would only make the coming harvest sweeter. Several times I caught board members watching me with something like awe. They knew what it cost to stand there and take abuse from people who should have loved and supported me. The dinner bell rang, and we moved to find our seats. I wasn't surprised to find myself at a table near the kitchen, surrounded by distant relatives and plus ones no one knew what to do with. Thomas and Melissa held court at the head table, my parents glowing with pride beside them. Victoria sat with what she considered the fashion elite, though I recognized most of them as hangers-on and Instagram influencers with purchased followers. As the salad course was served, I noticed it featured organic microgreens from one of my farms. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were literally eating food I'd grown while mocking me for growing it. I wondered if they'd choke on it when they learned the truth. The woman beside me, some third cousin's new girlfriend, tried to make conversation about the weather. I appreciated her kindness, but couldn't focus on small talk when I was about to flip their entire world upside down. The dinner progressed with painful predictability. Thomas stood multiple times to accept toasts, each speech more sycophantic than the last. Business associates praised his vision while secretly sending resumes to competitors. Family friends gushed about what a power couple he and Melissa made, already calculating how this union could benefit them. Through it all, my phone buzzed with updates from my legal team. Every document was in place. Every contingency planned for. The trap was set. My father returned to the microphone as dessert was served. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd never been challenged, never been told no. He spoke about the responsibility of legacy, about trusting the next generation to carry forward what previous generations had built. The irony was palpable to those of us who knew the truth. He was handing over ashes and calling them an empire. As he began the formal announcement of Thomas's succession, I felt the moment arrive. Everything I'd worked for, every insult I'd endured, every night I'd spent building something they said was worthless, had led to this. I stood slowly, my movement drawing eyes from nearby tables. My father frowned at the interruption but continued speaking. I raised my voice just enough to carry. "Actually, father, about the company succession." The room didn't immediately quiet. My father looked annoyed at the interruption from his least favorite child. Thomas laughed and called out something about the farmer wanting to give business advice. But I remained standing, waiting. A board member, Mr. Harrison, stood as well. Then Mrs. Chin. Then Mr. Blackstone. One by one, 5 board members rose to their feet. The room began to take notice. My father's annoyance turned to confusion. "Belinda, whatever this is, now is not the time," he said through the microphone. But his voice had lost some of its authority. The standing board members had created a ripple of uncertainty through the crowd. Melissa tugged at Thomas's sleeve, her perfectly painted face showing the first cracks of concern. I spoke clearly, my voice carrying without the need for a microphone. "I'm afraid Thomas can't be CEO, Father. You see, that would require him to have a company to run." The room fell silent except for the clink of someone setting down a glass too hard. My mother's face had gone pale. Victoria stopped mid-laugh at something someone had whispered. Thomas recovered first, his voice dripping with condescension. "Everyone, my sister seems to have had too much champagne. Perhaps someone should drive her back to her farm." He tried for a laugh, but it came out forced. The board members remained standing, their faces grave. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and heavy. I pulled out my phone, holding it up. As of 3 hours ago, I own 68% of Hartwell Industries. The board members here own another 15%. Together, we control 83% of the company you're toasting. The silence exploded into chaos. People talking over each other, chairs scraping as guests turned to get a better view. My father's face had gone from pale to purple. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered into the microphone. "Some kind of sick joke." Thomas, still trying to maintain control, laughed harshly. "The farmer thinks she bought our company? With what? Vegetable profits?" But his eyes darted nervously to the standing board members. He knew they wouldn't participate in a prank. Mr. Harrison, the senior board member, spoke into the sudden hush. "It's true. Ms. Hartwell has been the majority shareholder for several months. We've been working with her to address the serious mismanagement that threatens the company's survival." His words were measured, professional, but they landed like bombs. Serious mismanagement. Threatens survival. The implications were clear. My mother stood abruptly, swaying slightly. Her perfectly composed facade cracked completely. "This is impossible," she said, her voice shrill. "You're lying. All of you. This is some conspiracy." She looked around wildly for support, but the other guests had become spectators to a drama they couldn't have imagined. Even the waitstaff had stopped, trays forgotten, watching the family empire crumble in real time. I opened a folder I'd placed at my seat earlier, pulling out documents. "Would you like to see the share certificates, Mother? Or perhaps the board resolutions? How about the forensic accounting report detailing exactly how Thomas and Victoria have been draining the company?" Each word was precise, calm. I'd rehearsed this moment too many times to waste it on emotion. Melissa's baby voice cut through the chaos. "Tommy, what's she talking about? You said your company was worth billions. You said we'd have houses in 5 countries. Her grasping nature, previously hidden under a veneer of breeding, showed itself fully. Thomas tried to shush her, but she yanked her arm away. "You promised me an empire." I addressed the room, but my eyes stayed on my family. Hartwell Industries is 3 months from bankruptcy. My brother has gambling debts exceeding $12 million, all hidden in falsified company expenses. My sister's fashion line has lost 90% of its investment, funded by employee pension funds. My father has been signing off on fraudulent reports to hide these losses from shareholders. The room erupted. Board members who weren't in the know demanded answers. Investors pulled out phones to call their advisors. Society matrons whispered behind their hands, mentally recalculating the social standings of everyone involved. The perfectly orchestrated engagement party had become a public execution of the Hartwell legacy. Thomas lunged toward me, but was stopped by his own unsteady feet and Mr. Blackstone's restraining hand. "You vindictive witch," he snarled, all pretense of charm gone. "You've been planning this. Spying on us. Waiting to humiliate us." His face was ugly with rage, the golden boy mask finally slipping completely. Victoria shrieked from across the room. You can't do this. The Milan Atelier, the Fashion Week shows, my entire career. You're destroying everything out of jealousy because you're nothing but a dirty farmer no one wants. Her fashion friends backed away from her, suddenly remembering urgent appointments elsewhere. The rats were already fleeing the sinking ship. I let them rage, let the room see who they really were. When the initial fury died down, I continued. I bought this company to save it. To save the jobs of the thousands of employees who depend on it. To preserve what my grandfather built before you all corrupted it with greed and ego. The company will survive. Your positions in it will not. My father finally found his voice. You're our daughter. How could you betray your family like this? The hypocrisy was staggering. The man who'd spent 30 years dismissing me, mocking me, being ashamed of me, now invoked family loyalty. I met his eyes steadily. You betrayed me first. Every time you called me an embarrassment. Every time you ignored my success. Every time you chose them over me. The board members began distributing packets to certain guests, the major shareholders and investors who had a right to know the full extent of the damage. As they read, faces went from shocked to horrified to furious. Cousin Jennifer's husband, who'd invested heavily based on family connections, looked ready to be sick. Uncle Robert, who'd guaranteed loans based on the company's supposed value, had gone gray. Melissa's voice rose to a shriek. She was berating Thomas, demanding to know how he could lie to her, how he could promise her a fortune that didn't exist. Their argument became physical as she tried to rip off the engagement ring, and he grabbed her wrist. Security moved in, but I waved them off. Let everyone see the true nature of these relationships built on greed and appearances. My mother collapsed into her chair, the weight of social ruin crushing her. Everything she'd worked for, every connection she'd cultivated, every carefully managed appearance, was crumbling. Tomorrow, the gossip would spread like wildfire. The Hartwells were broke. The Hartwells were frauds. The Hartwells were finished. In her world, there was no greater catastrophe. Victoria tried a different approach, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. Belinda, please. We're sisters. You can't destroy my dreams like this. Think of all we've shared. But what had we shared? She'd spent our childhood making sure I knew I was less than her. She'd spread rumors about my mental health. She'd used every opportunity to humiliate me. These weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration that her victim had fought back. I pulled out one final document. This is a cease and desist order regarding the misuse of company funds. All personal expenses charged to company accounts must be repaid within 30 days. All assets purchased with embezzled funds will be seized. All contracts signed under fraudulent pretenses will be void. The legal language was dry, but the impact was devastating. Thomas did quick mental math and paled further. The cars, the boat, the condo in Vegas, he thought no one knew about, all bought with company money. All about to be taken away. His gambling debts, no longer hidden by creative accounting, would come due immediately. The dangerous people he owed would not be as patient as family. Victoria's entire fashion inventory, her studio equipment, her show venues, all paid for with stolen funds. Without the company's backing, she had nothing. No talent to fall back on, no business acumen to rebuild. Just empty dreams and expensive tastes with no way to fund them. As the full scope of the catastrophe settled over the room, I felt a strange peace. The girl they'd mocked for having dirt under her nails had uprooted their entire garden of lies. But I wasn't done yet. The revelation was only beginning. Tomorrow, when the markets opened, when the news broke, when the full audit was released, they would understand that I hadn't just bought their company. I'd bought their entire world. And unlike them, I knew how to make things grow. The room held its breath as I moved to the center, no longer needing to hide in the shadows or accept my place at the table by the kitchen. Every eye followed me, waiting for the next revelation. I had their complete attention now, these people who had spent decades looking through me as if I were invisible. The farmer's daughter had become the storyteller of their downfall. Let me tell you what you've been mocking all these years, I began, my voice steady and clear. While you laughed at my dirty hands and called me a peasant, I built an agricultural empire that spans 3 states. My company, Terra Innovations, doesn't just grow vegetables. We've revolutionized sustainable farming technology. Our proprietary irrigation systems are used in 12 countries. Our soil rehabilitation programs have restored 20,000 acres of dead farmland. Gasps rippled through the crowd as I continued listing achievements they'd never bothered to learn about. The partnership with tech giants to develop AI-driven crop management systems. The exclusive contracts with major restaurant chains. The sustainable packaging innovation that had attracted investment from environmental funds worth billions. Each revelation was a nail in the coffin of their assumptions. Uncle Robert, who'd made countless jokes about me slopping pigs, went pale when I mentioned our latest valuation. $400 million, with projected growth that would double that within 2 years. His own portfolio, I knew, was worth a fraction of that despite his constant boasting. Aunt Margaret clutched her pearls, literally, as she processed that her farmer niece could buy and sell her 10 times over. But I wasn't finished. The crown jewel of my empire wasn't the farms or the technology. It was the research facility we'd built in partnership with 3 major universities. We were developing drought-resistant crops that could feed millions in water-scarce regions. The UN had approached us about implementing our programs in developing nations. While my family had been building their house of cards, I'd been building solutions for global hunger. The irony was delicious. Every cruel comment about dirt and farming had only fueled my determination. Every time they'd excluded me from family business discussions because I couldn't possibly understand, I'd learned more about what not to do. Their mockery had been my motivation, their dismissal my driving force. And now, their company would become just another asset in my portfolio. Thomas found his voice, though it cracked with desperation. You're lying. This is all fabricated. No one builds that kind of wealth from farming. But several guests were already on their phones, verifying my claims. The beauty of success is that it leaves a digital trail. Articles in agricultural journals, features in business magazines they'd never read, awards from organizations they'd never heard of because they'd never bothered to look beyond their narrow world. I pulled up a presentation on my phone, casting it to the large screen meant for showing engagement photos. The first slide showed a photo of my first small farm, the one they'd all mocked. The next showed the current aerial view of the same location, now a sprawling complex of greenhouses, processing facilities, and research buildings. The transformation was stunning, even to those who'd never stepped foot on a farm. But it was the financial charts that really silenced them. Revenue growth that would make any tech startup jealous. Profit margins that put their manufacturing business to shame. Partnership deals with names everyone recognized. Investment offers from venture capital firms begging to buy in. While Hartwell Industries had been bleeding money, Terra Innovations had been printing it. The real kicker came when I showed the employee benefits. Full healthcare, including mental health coverage. Profit sharing that had made millionaires of some of my earliest workers. Educational programs that sent employees' children to college. A retirement plan that actually meant something. Everything my father had cut from Hartwell Industries to fund Thomas and Victoria's vanity projects, I'd implemented and more. Victoria, mascara running down her cheeks, tried one last attack. So what? You got lucky playing in dirt. That doesn't give you the right to destroy our lives. The entitlement was breathtaking. She genuinely believed that their right to waste money superseded the rights of employees to have jobs, of investors to see returns, of suppliers to be paid. In her world, consequences were for other people. I turned to address her directly. Lucky? I worked 18-hour days while you partied in Paris. I reinvested every penny while you spent millions on fashion shows no one attended. I built relationships with workers while you treated them like servants. There was no luck, Victoria. Only work you were too precious to do and risks you were too pampered to take. Mr. Harrison stepped forward with a thick folder. Perhaps MS. Hartwell should share the full audit results. The room tensed. If what I'd revealed so far was bad, they knew the detailed audit would be worse. I took the folder, grateful for his support. These board members had risked their own positions to help me save the company. They were the only ones in this room who'd put principle over profit. The numbers were damning. Thomas hadn't just gambled with his own money. He'd been approving contracts with shell companies owned by his gambling associates, funneling company money through fake consulting fees. The construction project he'd championed had cost 3 times the estimate because he'd been skimming from the top. His executive expense account showed charges at casinos from Vegas to Monaco. But Thomas was an amateur compared to what my parents had enabled with Victoria. Her fashion line hadn't just lost money. It had been a black hole designed to suck in funds. Inventory purchased and mysteriously lost. Venue rentals for shows that never happened. Designer consultants who didn't exist. Marketing campaigns that were just transfers to offshore accounts. It wasn't just failure, it was fraud. The room had gone from shocked to angry. Investors who'd trusted the Hartwell name were calculating their losses. Business partners were reassessing every deal. Society friends were distancing themselves, literally stepping back as if failure might be contagious. The Hartwell dynasty hadn't just fallen, it had been revealed as a criminal enterprise in designer clothing. Melissa's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and vindictive. She'd stopped crying and started calculating. "You told me your trust fund was worth $50 million, she hissed at Thomas. "You said we'd live like royalty. I gave up other prospects for you." The mask had dropped completely. The sweet baby voice was gone, replaced by the bitter tone of a gold digger who'd struck pyrite. Their argument escalated, providing a sideshow to the main event. She accused him of fraud, which was ironic given the circumstances. He accused her of only loving him for money, which was obviously true. When she threw the engagement ring at him, it bounced off his chest and skittered across the marble floor. No one moved to pick it up. It lay there, a symbol of everything fake about this celebration. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "What happens now?" The society queen reduced to asking her farmer daughter for answers. The woman who'd spent my childhood telling me I'd never amount to anything, now dependent on my mercy. I could have been cruel, could have twisted the knife, but I'd learned something from all those years in the dirt. Vengeance is less satisfying than justice. I outlined the plan. Thomas would be removed as executive vice president immediately. He would have the option to enter a rehabilitation program for his gambling addiction. If he completed it, and if he cooperated with authorities about his fraudulent activities, I would consider allowing him a low-level position in the company, with no access to funds and under strict supervision. It was more than he deserved, but enough to show I wasn't heartless. Victoria's fashion line would be liquidated immediately. However, I would offer her a position in Terra Innovation's new sustainable fashion division, working with agricultural waste to create eco-friendly textiles. She would start at entry-level, earning what any new employee would earn. If she showed aptitude and dedication, she could build a real career instead of a vanity project. The offer was genuine, though I doubted she'd take it. For my parents, I proposed a modest retirement package, enough to live comfortably but not lavishly. They would need to sell the estate and downsize significantly. The luxury cars, the yacht, the vacation homes would all go to repay what had been stolen from the company. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue criminal charges for their role in covering up the fraud. It was generous, considering they could have faced jail time. The board members distributed separation agreements to Thomas and Victoria, effective immediately. Security guards, discreet till now, moved closer in case of violence. But my siblings seemed deflated, the fight gone out of them. Thomas stared at the separation agreement like it was written in foreign language. Victoria clutched her designer purse like a life preserver, perhaps calculating its resale value. The empire they'd thought eternal had existed only in their imagination. The real empire, the one built on innovation and hard work instead of inheritance and ego, had been growing quietly in fields they'd never bothered to visit. The very thing they'd mocked, the soil under my fingernails, had been the foundation of something far greater than anything they'd achieved with all their advantages. As the party dissolved into chaos, guests fleeing the scandal, staff unsure whether to keep serving champagne, I stood calm in the center of the storm. Tomorrow would bring lawsuits, media attention, and the hard work of rebuilding Hartwell Industries. But tonight, I had shown them all that the farmer they'd dismissed had been cultivating more than vegetables. I'd been growing justice, and the harvest had finally come in. The aftermath of the revelation was swift and brutal. Thomas, his face alternating between rage and panic, tried to rally support from the remaining guests. He grabbed the microphone, appealing to family loyalty, to shared history, to anything that might save him. But the room had already chosen sides, and it wasn't his. When he threatened legal action, claiming I'd stolen the company through fraudulent means, my lead attorney stepped forward. MS. Hartwell has operated entirely within the law, she stated, her voice cutting through Thomas's desperate rambling. Every share purchase was documented and reported. Every transaction was transparent. In contrast, we have evidence of systematic embezzlement, securities fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty by current management. Criminal charges are being considered. The threat of prison finally silenced Thomas. The golden boy who'd never faced a consequence in his life was finally understanding that his actions had prices attached. Victoria tried a different approach, appealing to emotion rather than law. She fell to her knees in front of me, a designer-clad supplicant begging for mercy. Her mascara had created dark rivers down her cheeks, her carefully styled hair was disheveled, and for the first time in our lives, she looked genuinely vulnerable. Please, Belinda. I know I was cruel, but we're sisters. You can't destroy my entire life's work. Fashion is all I know, all I am. I helped her to her feet, not out of forgiveness, but because I refused to let her make herself the victim in this narrative. Your life's work? You mean spending other people's money on your hobby? Fashion isn't what you are, Victoria. It's what you thought would make you special without having to actually achieve anything. The sustainable fashion position I'm offering you is a chance to discover who you really are when you can't buy your way to relevance. She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. You want me to work with agricultural waste? To make clothes from garbage? The revulsion in her voice said everything about why she'd failed. She couldn't see opportunity, only humiliation. She couldn't imagine innovation, only degradation. Even facing bankruptcy, she clung to the pretensions that had destroyed her. My parents stood together, a united front in their downfall as they'd never been in their success. My father's commanding presence had shrunk, his shoulders bowed under the weight of his failures. My mother clutched his arm, her social armor cracked beyond repair. The power couple who'd ruled this city's elite circles had become cautionary tales in the span of an evening. You're still our daughter, my father said, trying to find the authority he'd lost. This is your family you're destroying. Your legacy. But his words rang hollow. The legacy was already destroyed by their own hands. I was just the one documenting the damage and clearing the rubble so something better could be built. No, father. This is your legacy. I gestured to the room, to the fleeing guests, to his children who'd never learned the value of work or the cost of failure. You built a kingdom on sand and are shocked it's collapsing. I'm not destroying anything. I'm salvaging what you would have lost completely. The employees who still have jobs tomorrow will thank me, even if you never do. Uncle Robert, emboldened by liquor and desperation, tried to physically intimidate me. He'd co-sign loans based on the company's supposed value and faced financial ruin. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. You vindictive little witch. You've destroyed us all. His breath reeked of alcohol and fear. Security moved instantly, but I raised my hand to stop them. I looked Robert in the eye, letting him see that the nice little niece he'd mocked for decades was gone. Touch me again, and assault charges will be the least of your problems. I have recordings of every insider trading tip you've shared at these family gatherings, every tax scheme you've bragged about, every bribe you've admitted to after your third whiskey. So I suggest you remove your hand and what's left of your dignity. He released me, stumbling backward. The room watched as one by one, the pillars of the Hartwell dynasty revealed themselves as hollow props. Each threat exposed another crime. Each accusation uncovered another failing. The empire hadn't fallen, it had never existed except as a collective delusion maintained by stolen money and mutual lies. Melissa provided unexpected entertainment by turning on everyone. The gold digger had nothing left to lose and decided to burn every bridge on her way out. She revealed Thomas's affairs, his drug use, his connections to dangerous people who would come collecting now that his funds were cut off. She exposed Victoria's eating disorder, her prescription pill addiction, her desperate attempts to buy her way into fashion circles that laughed at her behind her back. But the cruelest revelations were about my parents. How my father had 3 mistresses, each thinking she was the only one. How my mother had been siphoning money into accounts in her maiden name, preparing for a divorce that never came because the facade was more important than happiness. How they'd both known about their children's crimes and chosen to enable rather than intervene. The family that had presented such a perfect front to the world was revealed as a collection of strangers bound by greed and held together by fraud. The engagement party had become an autopsy, each revelation another cut revealing the rot beneath the skin. And I stood as both coroner and next of kin, documenting the cause of death, terminal selfishness complicated by willful blindness. As security began escorting the most disruptive guests out, I gathered the board members and key investors who'd remained. We had work to do. The company needed immediate stabilization. Employees needed reassurance. Contracts needed review. The real work of building something sustainable would begin at dawn, but the groundwork had to be laid tonight. Thomas made one last attempt at negotiation, pulling me aside with the charm he'd used to talk his way out of consequences his entire life. "Belinda, we're family. Surely we can work something out. I know I haven't been the best brother, but this is extreme. Think about what grandfather would want." The manipulation was transparent, invoking the one family member who'd actually cared about me. I pulled out grandfather's letter, the one from the sealed envelope. "Let me tell you what grandfather wanted." I read aloud, "Belinda, if you're reading this, then you've discovered what I've left you. Use it to save what can be saved and burn what needs burning. The company will die under their management, but you have the skills to make something new grow from the ashes. Don't let false loyalty to family prevent you from protecting the employees who depend on us. They're the real family legacy." Thomas went white. Grandfather knew what we were doing? He saw it all and said nothing? The betrayal in his voice was rich, considering his own actions. But that was Thomas, always the victim in his own narrative, never the villain despite leaving destruction in his wake. The party finally ended not with champagne toasts and dancing, but with lawyers exchanging business cards and security checking that nothing valuable had been stolen in the chaos. The string quartet had long since packed up and left. The ice sculptures melted unnoticed. The engagement cake sat untouched, its perfect frosting hiding whatever lay beneath, a final metaphor for the entire Hartwell dynasty. My family left separately, each nursing their wounds and plotting their next moves. Thomas would hire lawyers with money. He didn't have to fight a battle he'd already lost. Victoria would try to leverage connections that would dry up the moment the scandal hit the news. My parents would retreat to their mansion to inventory what they'd have to sell and practice the explanations they'd give to their society friends. But I stayed until the end, helping the staff clean up the wreckage of what was supposed to be a celebration. These were the people I was really saving, the ones who worked hard and deserved better than to lose their livelihoods to my family's greed. Several thanked me quietly, having heard enough to understand that tomorrow they'd still have jobs. The catering manager, Maria, who'd worked family events for 20 years, hugged me with tears in her eyes. As I walked to my truck, the valet who'd sneered at me earlier ran to get it, calling me Miss Hartwell with genuine respect. The same vehicle they'd mocked for being too common now represented something different: authenticity in a world of facades, substance in a realm of appearances. I tipped him well and drove away from the estate that had been my childhood prison. Tomorrow, the media would feast on the scandal. The business journals would analyze the takeover. The society pages would document the fall from grace. But tonight, I drove home through streets wet with spring rain, thinking about seeds and soil and the patience required to grow something real. The farm girl had conquered the kingdom, but more importantly, she'd remained true to the values that made the conquest possible. And that, more than any financial victory, was the real triumph. 6 months later, I stood in the same boardroom where my father had once held court, but everything had changed. The pretentious portraits of Hartwell men had been replaced with photos of our employees and the communities we served. The mahogany table, where so many destructive decisions had been made, now hosted productive meetings focused on growth and sustainability. Most importantly, the culture of fear and greed had been replaced with one of innovation and accountability. The transition hadn't been smooth. Thomas had indeed hired lawyers, burning through his remaining funds in a futile attempt to challenge my ownership. When that failed, he'd spiraled deeper into gambling, eventually hitting rock bottom when his dangerous creditors came collecting. It took a beating that left him hospitalized and a genuine fear for his life before he finally accepted my offer of rehabilitation. He was currently 3 months clean, working in our warehouse, learning what honest work felt like for the first time in his life. Victoria had surprised everyone, mostly herself. After the initial humiliation wore off, she'd shown up at Terra Innovations, resume in hand. The sustainable fashion division intrigued her more than she'd admitted. Starting at the bottom had been brutal for someone used to having assistants and unlimited budgets, but she discovered an actual talent for design when forced to be creative with limited resources. Her first line using agricultural waste had caught the attention of eco-conscious retailers. She still had a long way to go, but she was building something real for the first time. My parents' adjustment had been the hardest to watch. The estate sale had been a media circus, with former friends showing up to gawk and purchase pieces of their fallen empire. They'd moved to a modest condo, my father taking a consulting position with a small firm that valued his early expertise before ego had corrupted it. My mother had fallen into deep depression, the loss of her social standing harder to bear than any financial hardship. She was in therapy now, slowly unpacking decades of measuring worth through others' eyes. The company transformation had been remarkable. Hartwell Industries, rebranded as Hartwell Solutions, had stabilized and begun growing. We'd sold off the vanity projects and focused on core manufacturing with an emphasis on sustainability. The employees, energized by profit sharing and genuine investment in their development, had increased productivity by 40%. We'd paid back the pension fund, restored benefits, and created educational programs for advancement. The integration with Terra Innovations had created unexpected synergies. Our agricultural technology improved their supply chain efficiency. Their manufacturing capabilities helped us scale our innovations faster. Together, we were pioneering sustainable solutions that neither company could have achieved alone. The farmer and the factory had found common ground. The media coverage had been intense initially. Business journals wrote case studies about the hostile takeover by an insider. Society pages delighted in the fall of the Hartwell dynasty. But I'd refused all interviews, letting the work speak for itself. Eventually, the story shifted from scandal to success, from family drama to business innovation. We became known not for the takeover but for what came after. I still lived in the same penthouse, still drove the same truck, still spent weekends at the farms when I could. Success hadn't changed who I was, only confirmed what I'd always known. Real value comes from creating something useful, not from inheriting something prestigious. The dirt under my fingernails had been more honest than all their manicured pretenses. The board meeting concluded with unanimous approval for our latest expansion, a vertical farming operation that would bring fresh produce to urban food deserts. As the members filed out, Mr. Harrison lingered. He'd become a trusted advisor and something of a father figure, filling the void left by my biological father's emotional absence. "You know," he said, "your grandfather would be proud. Not just of the business success, but of how you've handled your family. You could have destroyed them completely. Instead, you gave them chances to rebuild. That takes more strength than any hostile takeover." I appreciated his words, but I'd learned that seeking approval, even posthumous, was a trap. I'd done what needed doing for my own reasons. That evening, I attended a very different party, the annual Terra Innovations Employee Appreciation Dinner. No champagne fountains or string quartets, just good food, genuine laughter, and people who'd earned their celebrations through hard work. Maria, the catering manager from that fateful engagement party, now ran our company events. She'd thanked me again for saving her job, but the truth was, she'd saved herself by being excellent at what she did. Thomas attended, still awkward in his warehouse uniform but sober and present. He'd apologized, genuinely, for the years of mockery. I'd accepted it while maintaining boundaries. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and trust had to be earned. He understood that now, understood that his name meant nothing without character to back it up. Victoria arrived late, paint under her fingernails instead of a perfect manicure. She excitedly showed me photos of her latest designs, clothing that looked high fashion but was made entirely from agricultural waste products. The shallow princess had discovered depth when forced to dive below the surface. She still had ego, still loved luxury, but now she was earning it instead of expecting it. Even my parents made an appearance, invited at the request of employees who remembered kinder versions of them from decades past. They sat quietly, observing what their company had become under management that valued people over appearances. My mother had started volunteering at a local food bank, finding purpose in service instead of status. My father had begun mentoring young entrepreneurs, teaching them about business while learning about humility. The evening progressed with award presentations for outstanding employees, profit-sharing announcements that drew cheers, and unveiling of new community partnerships. This was what success looked like, not crystal chandeliers and empty compliments, but shared achievement and genuine connection. The family I'd built through respect was stronger than the one I'd inherited through blood. As I gave the closing speech, I looked out at faces that had once served canapés at Hartwell galas, now running departments and leading innovations. I spoke about growth, not just financial but personal. About how every person in that room had planted seeds through their work, creating harvests that fed communities and built futures. The metaphors came naturally. Farming had taught me that the best things take time, require care, and grow stronger when rooted in good soil. The applause was warm and genuine, so different from the obligatory clapping at family events. These people weren't here for appearances or networking. They were here because they were part of something meaningful. As they returned to their celebrations, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The city sparkled below, lights twinkling like stars brought to earth. Somewhere in those lights were my family members, rebuilding their lives from foundations of truth instead of facades. Somewhere were the employees whose jobs we'd saved, the communities our food nourished, the future we were building one sustainable choice at a time. I thought about that long-ago birthday when I'd asked for gardening tools instead of jewelry, the moment that had marked me as different in my family's eyes. They'd seen it as rejection of their values, but it had been an embrace of something deeper. The tools to create rather than simply consume. The patience to nurture rather than demand. The wisdom to know that true wealth grew from roots, not from rules about what was acceptable. My phone buzzed with a message from a young employee in our agricultural program, excited about a breakthrough in soil remediation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to grow. But tonight, I stood between two worlds, the one I'd left and the one I'd built, knowing I'd chosen correctly. The girl they'd mocked for having dirt under her nails had used those same hands to rebuild an empire and save a family, even if they'd never wanted saving. The transformation was complete, but the growth would continue. Because that's what farmers understood that my family never had. The harvest is just the beginning. You take what you've grown, you save the best seeds, and you plant again. Season after season, year after year, generation after generation. Not seeking approval or validation, but creating value that sustains long after the party's end and the champagne goes flat. I returned to the celebration, to my chosen family of workers and dreamers, builders and believers. Tomorrow, we'd be back in the fields and factories, offices and laboratories, continuing the work of growth. But tonight, we celebrated not the destruction of the Hartwell dynasty, but the cultivation of something infinitely more valuable. A legacy built on merit instead of mockery, substance instead of show, and the radical idea that everyone deserves the chance to grow. Do you ever feel like an outsider in your own family? Have you ever been mocked for choosing a different path? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about triumph over adversity. Share this with someone who needs to remember that their worth isn't determined by others' opinions. Thank you for joining me on this journey from the fields to the boardroom, and remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you, but building something so beautiful they wish they'd helped. Until next time, keep growing, keep building, and keep believing in your own worth.